Something happened last night at group that was like misunderstood, and they thought I was propositioning Becca to like go in the other room. And they're like, we'll give you 7 minutes. And I was like, what am I going to do with the other 5? Yeah, I think just the topic of sexuality is so hard to discuss in the church, and a lot of times, traditional churches from the pulpit, it's just very like negative and condescending and seen as a bad thing, an evil thing. And it's amazing still, even in a church like Sandals, how difficult it is to talk about sexuality and like kind of go into detail about what's going on in our own hearts. Especially as men, who typically struggle with sexual sin more often. That's just been a pattern of where we find ourselves, and guys get stuck and struggle. And so I'd love to just talk through, how do we overcome this huge issue of sexuality? What are some of the reasons that we tend to fall into it? Maybe that's a good place to start. Why do you see men falling into sexual sin so often? What do you think some of the reasons are?
You want me to go first? Yeah, you looked right at me too. I hear a bunch of different reasons and have experienced a lot of different things. I mean, when I think back to even my own personal experience growing up, but just my professional experience before. And I don't think we ever really talked to our boys about sex in the right way. I think it was during the unconference that you and Adam talked to me about, have you talked to your son yet? And I'm like, no, is it time? And you gave me the books. So we had to talk, right? So we ripped the Band-Aid off about how has God set up sex? Like how has God engineered you and wired you? And like, what's the basic function? How do we not make it a mystery, right? People always ask me, how do you keep guns in your house? I'm like, well, they're not a mystery to my kids from when I was an officer. Like we've taken the mystery out of it. There's no more to that. I think sex is one of those topics that people don't want to dive into. Mm-hmm. They don't want to dive into it with their kids. And it's been interesting to talk about it with our friends and go, yeah, we've already had the talk with our son and started it with our daughter. And some friends look at you like, oh, like really? Oh, I hope I don't share anything with my kid.
You're so abusive.
Yeah. So yeah. But I think it's one of those taboo topics, but it stimulates that more animalistic side of you, and then it becomes if nobody talks about it, you're embarrassed by it, so I'm not going to share it.
Right.
And I think it just creates this really like weird ceiling for guys to not want to discuss it.
Right.
And so
you basically just approach it however you see best.
Right.
Right. If nobody's told you how you're supposed to approach it, you just kind of do what your friends or media tell you to do and just move forward in that way.
So your question was, what are we really seeking in?
Yeah, like what gets us off track as men sexually?
Yeah, I mean, for myself and with the guys that I get to work with in recovery groups, it's at the very, very bottom core of what we're looking for is intimacy. And we end up misusing sex to try to achieve intimacy. That's at the core. I think at a subsurface level, guys learn real fast how to use pornography, masturbation, fantasy to soothe kind of their emotional wounds or pain or discomfort, right? So I know for me, the discomfort of worrying about paying bills on time or an argument with my wife, it's thrown me into an emotional kind of dysregulation, right? We call it our affect. Our affect is how I kind of, my emotional state and the way I'm experiencing the world. And when that state gets disrupted, I want it to get back to normal.
Yeah.
So I'm pretty much willing to do anything to get it back there. And for lots of people that turns into alcohol or pills or
It's food, a quick fix.
Right. And today, because pornography is so easy to get a hold of, guys end up using pornography to re-regulate themselves.
Yeah.
It soothes, that emotional discomfort, and I think it's a poor attempt at achieving intimacy, because at the end of the day, intimacy is what's really going to re-regulate whatever emotional turmoil we're in, because we're disconnected from others and we're disconnected from God.
Yeah.
How do I get connected again fast?
Yeah. Mark, in some of the guys groups you've been a part of, what do you kind of see as the common things that get guys off track?
Well, I definitely, what Tony said resonates, because it's as adults, we definitely have our, what I've noticed is not only our low moments kind of bring us to that temptation, but sometimes when something really good happens, it's almost like a celebratory thing, like, hey man, I did this good thing or whatever, and I want to celebrate, and so that temptation comes in the lows and the highs, I feel like. And the common denominator seems to be in the group of guys that I'm in group with, like, we've all been exposed to pornography at a very young age.
Right.
And I'm unique in the sense that when my parents taught me about sex, I was like 5. They had this little book called Where Did I Come From? And it was a cartoon book that had, naked man, naked female, just a cartoon. It described what all the body parts were, and, penis goes inside the vagina, da-da-da. And I was too young to be embarrassed. I was just like, oh, that's how babies are? Okay, cool, that's how they come to be. And so it's when I heard about the storks and the birds and the bees, I was like, well, why are they even talking about that? It didn't make sense. But then flash forward 5 years after that is when I was exposed to not just a naked lady, but hardcore intercourse. I was exposed to that, I saw that, and it was just instant, like some kind of stimulation that was so powerful that I couldn't wait to see it again after that first taste of it.
Right.
And I feel like that has never quite gone away,
Right.
There's always a temptation there, especially like if my wife and the girls go away for the weekend to visit family or something.
Right.
If I'm alone, oh man, the temptation goes on another level.
Right.
And I have to be diligent about connecting with one of my guys and say, hey, pray for me. I want to be alone for a good portion of time. I have to set a schedule for myself. I have to do this. I have to do projects to keep myself busy. Because if I don't take those steps, it goes awry real quick.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think the enemy not only sows those seeds of like, this is great, you want more of it, but also is just strategic in those moments of isolation. Like I experienced that. Like I haven't struggled with like masturbation and pornography since college, but anytime my wife leaves, it's like, all of a sudden, like I'm interested. I'm like, I haven't thought about this in years.
Right.
He's strategic. He wants to take us down. He wants us to become addicted to something that doesn't offer us anything. It doesn't offer us intimacy. It's false.
Totally.
Yeah, and what role do you guys see isolation playing in all of this? You mentioned it. I know I've experienced that. What does isolation do to kind of fuel the temptation towards sexual sin? And
well, I think it's a sin that takes place in the dark. Like nobody else is around, so you're alone. The accountability is to yourself.
Right.
And I think that's where guys get themselves in the most trouble. Is like we're pros at getting in trouble when we're by ourselves or together. Right. But even what you said about being alone, like I remember Fridays, like I would tell all the CPs, I'd be like, hey, Fridays, not always a great day for me to...
Oh, campus pastor.
Yeah, all of our campus pastors, I'm sorry, like in our meetings. And so I'll make sure I'm out of the house that day. Like I've told my wife and everything else, I'm like, no, because when you have other people holding you accountable, then that's the ultimate accountability is having other people with you. But I don't know why specifically with men, they seem to get themselves in more trouble, or we seem to get ourselves in more trouble when we're by ourselves. Like I've never quite understood it, because I think I can leave my wife at home alone for a week and she'd come back and the house would be amazing. She'd be rested and everything would be awesome.
Totally.
Yeah.
Well, and I mean, early in Genesis, God said it's not good for man to be alone, and I think that was more in a general sense, but I think even in a specific sense, it's true that it's not good for us to be alone. Like we're better when we're with women specifically, typically, and and when we're around other godly men as well,
Yes.
that push us in the right direction for sure.
I think what Mark was saying about, just about his temptation when he's alone and calling other guys, I've had to do that as well. The thing about being alone is there's nobody to reflect back to you what you're doing is not cool, or is harmful, even spiritually harmful to me, because you said earlier the enemy wants to get us addicted to something.
Right.
Well, the root of addiction is selfishness and self-centeredness, and that's alone by its nature, right? That means I'm just going to do whatever I want. And the way I want it, when I want it. And so it's centered around self, and isolation is being by myself. I get to be my king. I get to play God in my life at those moments and decide what's good for me and what's not. And so the lack of community keeps us from seeing God's true will for us in those moments. So to counteract that, one of the things he just said was, I got to reach out and call a guy and say, hey, I'm going to be alone. Can you pray for me? Set up some boundaries. I want to be held accountable. I've had to build that into just daily life. So, I'll schedule it every week. I have scheduled calls of different guys that know my story. I know theirs. I trust them. I know they're godly guys. I know the Spirit is in them. And we're getting on the phone in the morning or the afternoon. Hey, what's up? How's your week? What's going on? What are you struggling with? What can I pray for you for? And so I get ahead of it so that when I do get in those moments of being alone, they don't catch me by surprise. Right. I'm already I've done my workout, so I'm ready to handle it.
Yeah, and Scripture uses kind of the contrast of darkness versus light. When you bring things into light, they're exposed. And I think that act of reaching out is kind of already the exposure. It's not like I'm sitting down on my computer about to look at porn and now
then I pick up the phone.
Right. It's proactively like, hey, I'm going to bring just my life into the light. Like, I'm not going to have hidden corners that are sort of tucked away that nobody knows about.
That phone weighs 1,000 pounds in those moments.
Right. Yeah. Once you're that far down the road, it's pretty hard to.
Correct.
Yeah, it's being proactive, which I appreciate both of you guys saying that. Hey, I know I'm going to be alone. I know this is dangerous for me.
Yes.
And kind of getting ahead of those things.
Right.
That is really tied to confession too. It's kind of a pre-confession, but what's just the role you guys have seen either in men's groups or small groups of just confessing to others? How does that help us? What does it do for us?
It feels like every week in the lobby or something, I have somebody coming to just want to share. And when I've experienced it with my own confession, but when other people confess and you make it okay for them, you just see this sense of like a weight being lifted off of them. Mm-hmm. Because I think with sin, with sin inherently, it's just pulling you further from God and that distance that you start feeling. But also letting people know, like, hey, you're not alone in this. Like when I hear about the groups that Tony led or leads, like, man, that's such a resource that so many people don't know that we have, where it's like, you're not alone in this. Mm-hmm. But being able to confess to another man that can actually walk with you now through that and be a part of your journey, it's huge for people. Mm-hmm. Because the core sense of, I'm not alone, I've got community, and I've got somebody who really understands and isn't just giving me lip service. Yep. It's huge. Mm.
I personally don't know of anybody that struggles with sexual sin be able to get any progress with that, any lasting progress without confessing it.
Right.
Because there's people that you don't find out till later that they were holding something back for a long time.
Right.
And they were just, they were part of a group, they were in there, talk about, things and share certain things, but maybe not a particular thing. And then later out it comes out, hey, I've been holding something back, and they share it. And then you see progress come after that point, where I feel like, the enemy wants us to keep things in the dark, right? Things that we want to keep hidden, he wants it to stay hidden.
For sure.
Because once it comes out into the, into the light, it's like the enemy has a weaker grip on it. It's like his grasp is loosened tremendously, and God can really work. And that's why I think, in James 5:16, I think it is, confess your sins so that you can be healed.
Right.
And what's really fascinating is sometimes somebody will confess something that happened, sexually or whatever. And then after they share it, another guy will say, I really feel like I need to share something I haven't, I didn't think I would ever share this. And then it just causes like a chain reaction sometimes. And all these guys are confessing different things because one person was brave enough to, so I've seen confession change lives, like literally.
Right.
But it's hard to do. It's hard to be vulnerable, especially as guys where we want to be macho, like, oh, we have it together,
Right. And none of us do.
Right.
Yeah. So. And I think it's the appeal of Sandals is this, the vision of being real with ourselves, God, and others. And I think people love watching Matt do that. They love just the rawness. But confession is a whole nother level. It's this vulnerability of, I don't know how this is going to go. I don't know if I'm going to be shamed, dismissed, discounted as a man, as a person, as a Christian. And you use the word brave, I think, right? It's this, we talk about courage all the time with men's stuff. It's a courageous act to say, I screwed up in this specific way, and it's ugly. And man, it's such a powerful.
But if we've got a safe relationship made together, then I know whenever that happens to me, I can come back to you and go, hey man, I need to tell you something.
Right.
I got to clean something up.
Right.
And I know it's going to be received in a safe way, because we've built that history together.
Yeah.
That's what community does for us, right? The other thing is I think one of the, the way I learned to confess, or the terrible method of confession I created in my Christian walk was, I would do this like pressure valve release where it was like, I knew I was doing wrong and I had all of this stuff built up in me, and I was just like, it's just killing me. So I got to let a little of the gas off, and so I would go into a group meeting and kind of open the valve up and just say, yeah, I found myself this week kind of looking at some things and doing this or that. But really it was way, way deeper than that. Mm-hmm. And so I was just in this constant pattern of fooling myself and everybody else and never getting well, like you just said, from the verse from James, confess your sins one to another. And then I also, so once I was able to do that, that's when healing really started to happen.
Right.
But I think sin has a spiritual and emotional weight to it. It's like this, this metal thing here. You can feel it, and you can't hold it, but it's weighing you down. And it's not until you go and have that conversation with someone else that weight is really removed.
Right.
And I mean, I remember just feeling a tremendous sense of, I can finally live. I don't have to carry this anymore.
Yeah.
The Lord will never lay anything heavy on me.
Right.
He wants to take those things off of me.
Yeah. So, I think confession is a good part of the process. What does restoration look like, right? Because confession, what we don't want to do is just like confess the same things over and over and just stay on the hamster wheel. And because it's kind of a painful emotional journey where we're just sort of stuck in a cycle. What have you guys seen either in your own life or in groups really work toward reparation in people's lives?
I got a lot of thoughts about that because I see that a lot in our groups. And I think just by the nature of Sandals' mission, be real with ourselves, God, and others, it fosters this kind of constant confession, right? But where guys will get stuck is they miss the piece of, I have to confess, but then I've also got to repent.
Right.
I need to get to this place where I just hate what I'm doing, and I need to get mad about it. And just we always say there's three things you need to get well. That's, you have to have enough misery, and which will beget enough willingness, and then you need humility to recover. And so it's until somebody gets so miserable with their own stuff that they go, you know what? I'm not doing this anymore. Today is the last day I'm going to masturbate. Today's the day. Mm-hmm. That's when some real progress can be made. But if you're in this thing where you think, well, I'll just go tell Bogey that I, slipped up this morning when I got in the shower and everything will be cool. No, it's not. You got to stop. Right. And the Lord, otherwise you're just perpetuating your slavery to that addiction. And that just breaks my heart when I run across guys. So I feel compelled, because other guys did this with me. I feel compelled to say, look, man, God's got something better for you than that.
Right.
And it's obviously not delivering for you what you're trying to get from it, so stop.
Right.
Why don't we move into what God has for you? And why don't you start changing from the man that you are into the man that he wants you to be? And set yourself free from it.
Yeah.
All you got to do is
You're
get help
moving
and stop.
from self-serving to doing something that God actually wants us to do,
Yes.
which is like serving others.
Yes.
Right. It's God actually has better things for us
Absolutely.
than the things that temporarily satisfy. Like He satisfies in deeper places.
I think that's key too, because I think if you don't replace it with something godly,
Right.
then you're just going to go through the motions.
Correct.
Right. And so if you just say, okay, I'm going to stop doing it, but that's it,
Right.
you're going to come across that temptation over and over again. But if you, again, like when I'm alone at the house, I have to schedule myself activities, because if I don't, I'm going to get bored, and the temptation is going to, skyrocket.
Right.
And so I think that's key. Is okay, what are you going to do? Look at what God has for you. What are activities that are going to bless you? What are some things you can engage in that can take the place, of that?
Yeah, you're talking about the kind of a no-based sobriety. I'll just keep saying no to these things and then I'll be sober.
Right.
But you're not.
Eventually, you stop saying no.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because the Lord wants to replace that space that you open up with the no with something good. I love the term you just said, something that's going to benefit me or enlarge my life. Jesus is the giver of life. He wants to enlarge our lives and make things better, but these sins take away from us. They diminish our lives. So what I've had to do personally, and what I try to encourage guys to do is, once I start noticing I'm getting in that space where I'm like, oh, I kind of want to act out. I'm not feeling right. Porn would be a good option for me right now. I've gotten myself to where now I know that's the red flag for me to do something different. And I have a literal menu of things that will enlarge my life, that I know, which is going out and exercising, listening to a podcast. And I've got a set of podcasts that's a playlist. These are the safe ones, right? A worship playlist. I'm going to go there and just soak myself in worship music. I'm going to go read a book. I'm going to listen to an audiobook. I'm going to call 3 guys and ask them what's going on with them. Anything to make life larger.
Yeah.
Right.
How about for you, Aurelio, just in the last decade, as you've, God's transformed your life, you come to faith, how have you seen Him just repair you and your thoughts and actions?
It takes work, like a lot of work, because I think about the routines and just what was normal or even celebrated. Like I think about, times in high school or college where you're like, oh, look, we found a porn. Like that, I think to me, that used to be one of those more acceptable. I think that's what makes it harder for men to break that at times too, is it's acceptable and it's encouraged by
Everybody's doing it.
Yeah, everyone's got it. Oh, and
especially in groups of guys, sports, all that stuff.
Yeah, and all that. But that sense of, I really like what Tony was saying, like God has something more for you and something better. Because one of the things that I've shared just in our time talking is that, like what you said about dealing with stress and dealing with anxiety. Like there are times when all of a sudden my wife's like, why are you trying to have sex with me? And she's playing the NFL running back, stiff arming me. Because I'm like, well, it's okay if it's with you.
Right.
But realizing that's an unhealthy reflex also. Like that's not.
That's just another selfish ploy
Exactly.
to get what you want.
And so I have to share that with her and talk that through with her. But there's more, there's shame, I would say, more that comes now with, like, hey, looking at something you shouldn't have, or having thoughts that maybe you shouldn't have. And then especially in the role now that I'm in, like it just feels heavier.
Yes.
And I'm more thankful that it is heavier than just an errant, like, it's not a big deal, or that's not an issue.
Right.
But just really feeling God almost literally pulling you back and going, hey, that's not for you. Mm-hmm. And the example that you set, other men are going to see and start following. Yeah. And so I would say almost that added responsibility is what's really led to me feeling that transformation more. You know, I think I've shared with you, Tony, that like I worked a 6-year period when I was still with the police department, just working sex crimes.
Wow.
And so you would just be inundated with sex of all kinds. Like,
Right.
you know, it was primarily child abuse, but you're dealing with everything, and it completely desensitizes you. So as desensitized as I felt as a young man, or even before I got there, it just led it to another level where it's like, well, if I look at adult porn, or you know, if I masturbate,
It's
or
not near as bad as what I was saying.
It's not nearly as bad as what I investigated earlier or what I did there.
Right.
But now having, I would say, in the last 7 years, having those boundaries reestablished, like having to work away from, that's not an excuse, that's not okay, but just really having those boundaries reestablished and realize, like, God does have something better for you. Like,
Yes.
you know, and having the opportunity, like I think about my start to my day-to-day, the gym, and then my quiet time, you know, being able just to go on my walk and have my quiet time with God, it's, your focus is completely different and then taken someplace else. And so I know that it makes it a lot harder to have those feelings, or to give into those temptations when you're really rooting your day or your time in the Lord. And what am I really being called to do?
Yep.
And now these new reflexes, or these new, you know, patterns that I'm establishing have been, I would say, the biggest part of that transformative change. But accountability, I mean, I never had to have accountability to anyone. It was just kind of like, that's what I deal with.
Well, it sounds like you're working hard to develop intimacy with Jesus every day.
Right.
You're spending time with him, and the payoff for that is you have sobriety and serenity in your life. But if you're not developing that, then you're going to look for intimacy somewhere else.
Right.
You know, when things get weird.
Yeah.
And I think that's what freedom ultimately looks like. I think guys struggle with this idea because it's like, well, I'm never free, right? We're going to struggle to the day I die. There's always going to be images that tempt me. And the freedom is, I don't have to do it,
That's
right? I can choose Jesus. I can choose his love. I can choose all the things that he offers. And that's a beautiful choice that really gives us hope, to where it's not like it's all day, every day. You know, at some point there's a strength that builds up, you know, and I think it's important for guys to work hard enough, as you said, confess, share, so that they can get strong enough where they can make the choices of choosing Jesus and not just give in to the same pattern all the time.
Amen.
Right.
Appreciate you guys talking about it. I know it's a difficult topic, but thank you for willingness to just jump in and
You bet.
talk about difficult things. So
Thanks, man.
yeah, thank you
Thanks for having us.